Good morning, Scrabble. I wonder if some of you are a little bit like myself and absolutely hate texting. If you had a screenshot of the text history between myself and Kira, you would see maybe a lot of texts from her and very little reply from myself. It's not that I don't reply, I maybe call her or speak to her in person, but I just don't like texting. And if that's all you had to go off, you might think it's a very one-sided conversation that I really just don't want to be a part of. And hopefully that's not like our relationship with God. That if we were able to have a similar screenshot sent to us and we would just see God speaking and speaking and speaking and trying to get through to us, trying to communicate with us, and we give very little reply or no reply back. And even worse, sometimes we don't even recognize who it is speaking to us. When God speaks to us, we actually can't distinguish that it's him. And this was the case for Samuel. At the start of his life, he was a young man, and in 1 Samuel chapter 3, we read of God speaking to Samuel on a number of occasions one night. And on the first 3 times that God speaks to him, Samuel hears him. He actually wakes up. He actually goes through to Eli, who's the high priest at the time, and says, "Yes, were you speaking to me?" But he doesn't recognize it was the Lord speaking. And when he goes through to Eli, Eli's like, "I haven't been speaking to you. Go back to your bed." You see, he heard the Lord, but he didn't know him. And it says that in verse 7 of chapter 3. It says, Samuel did not yet know the Lord. He couldn't understand him because he didn't know him. And hopefully you listening to me at the minute, you know God, and you're hopefully able to distinguish his voice. But sometimes I think we're a little like Samuel. And thankfully for Samuel, he had someone in his life who knew the Lord well and knew his voice well, and that was Eli. And on the 3rd time, when Samuel went back to Eli, Eli said to him again, "I haven't been speaking to you, but it's been the Lord who's been speaking to you." And he says to Samuel, the next time you hear the Lord speak to you, you need to reply. You need to say to the Lord, "Yes, Lord, your servant hears." And thankfully at Scrabble, we have older and wiser Christians who can lead us, who can direct us in our faith and give us that godly wisdom to kind of show us God's purpose in our lives. And Samuel takes that on board and he goes back to the same place that the Lord had called him the first 3 times. He gets back into his bed and the Lord speaks to him once more and says, "Samuel, Samuel." And he replies, "Yes, Lord, your servant hears." And isn't it great to see that the Lord doesn't stop speaking to us? God constantly is speaking to us. He is constantly trying to communicate to us. He's constantly trying to speak to not just you and I, but your family, your friends, your neighbours. He wants relationships with his people. But the key point is here, we know God's always going to be speaking to us. But Samuel this time replied. Samuel heard the Lord's voice and said, "I'm here. I'm hearing you. I'll listen. I know it's you now." And we need to get to that point in our lives. We need to sometimes do that on a daily basis where we have to just say, "Lord, I am here. I am ready to surrender my life. I am ready to give up my own desires, and I am ready to do what you would have me do. I'm ready to go where you would have me go. I'm ready to speak to those people you would have me speak to." And that is how our relationship with God works. We need to listen to him and we need to understand when he is speaking and what we should do and what his will is for our lives. And you might be sitting thinking, how do we know the will of God? And again, it comes from Samuel knowing who's speaking. We need to understand who it is talking to us, and I mean really understand. And actually, John Piper on the website Desiring God, he has 3 pointers for us knowing God's will, and this is what I'll leave you with. To know God's will, to actually understand who it is speaking, we need to be reading our Bible. Point 1, we need to read the Word. We need to understand Scriptures. We need to understand what God is like. We need to understand his character, what he likes, what he desires us to do. Then we need to pray. We need to pray that God would help us to apply the Scriptures to our lives. We need to pray that we would have a renewed mind, that down here on earth we would be able to have a different viewpoint than the world. And actually in Romans chapter 12 verse 2 it says this, Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what the will of God is, and what is good and acceptable and perfect. By knowing him, reading his word, and praying into that, we can transform our lives for him. Hopefully, guys, this has been encouraging to you. And hopefully in this week and in the coming weeks, and especially over lockdown, when we have that extra time, that we're using that to get closer to God. We're using that to be able to discern and hear his voice, because his will in our life is the most important thing. What we do for Christ here on this earth is what is going to last. And I pray and hope that we would really take that on board, and we really, in our lives, want to see God's will come about here on earth. And we would see other people saved, and we would see our relationship with Christ grow. Thanks, guys.